In today's tutorial we're going to be looking at how to create a Flappy Bird style game using tphysics. So we're going to start by heading to this web address github.com/thebillington/tphysics. It will be available in the video description. We're going to click into tphysics.py. This is all of our tphysics code, so we're going to grab this as a raw file. That's just going to copy all of the code from the tphysics engine. We're now going to open up idle, and we're going to create a new file. We're going to paste our code into the new file, and we're going to save it. So if I come into my examples folder here, I'm going to save it as tphysics.py. Now it needs to be saved as tphysics, otherwise we won't be able to import this code into our game file. So we're going to save that, and we can now forget about this window. We're going to create another new file. We're going to save this, and this is really important. It needs to be in the same directory as where we saved tphysics. We're going to call this one Flappy Bird. Notice that I use underscores instead of spaces when I've got file names. That's really important when we're coding. We don't want spaces in file names, so we're going to call it Flappy_Bird. We're going to save it. We're now going to say from tphysics import game rectangle and circle. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to run that, and that should import our code for us, which means that now when we try to create a game, it should give us some parameters. So we're going to start by creating a variable called game, and we're going to instantiate a new game object. We're going to need to give it a name, which will be a string. So if we say game, you see name needs to be a string. We're going to call it Flappy Bird, and it's going to have a default color of grey, but we can pass in our own color if we want, and we're going to go with light blue. We are now going to create a game loop, and inside of our game loop we are going to update our game. Now this game loop is an infinite loop, and inside of this loop here we're going to have some sort of logic. For now we don't have anything in there, but what we're essentially going to do is every frame we're going to check if the user has pressed any buttons. We're going to move all of our shapes around, and this game.update is going to draw our new frame. So if we run this code, we should have an empty tphysics window called Flappy Bird with a light blue background. We're now going to want to create our player, so we're going to say player is going to be a circle, and our circle is asking for us an X, Y, radius and a color by default, which will be set to yellow. So let's create our player to the left hand side of the screen, so we need to give it a negative X value, let's say negative 150. We can start our player in the center of the screen. We're going to give it a radius of, let's say 30, and we're going to give it a color of yellow. That is defaulted, but I'm going to set it anyway. We're now going to add this shape to the game. So we're going to say game.addShapePlayer, and this will add our circle to the game, so that every time we update, we draw this circle. I'm going to make that slightly smaller, and we're going to move it slightly further over to the left. So there we go. Now in Flappy Bird, if you've ever played it, in fact let's go a little bit further over here to the left. Let's even more than that. There we go. Now the idea of Flappy Bird is this bird keeps falling, and every time you press the space key, what it's going to do is it's going to make our player jump. And when we jump, what will happen is over time our speed will decrease. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to keep track of the player speed. And what we can do is we're going to default this to a value of, let's say, -10. Okay. So now if every frame we update our player's Y position by adding on the player speed, and since this is a negative speed, this is going to add a negative number to our player's Y position, which will make them move down every frame, and that's quite quick. So that's quite a fast top speed. Now what we actually want to do is we want our player to fall over time. So if we were to think about if we throw a ball up in the air, it doesn't immediately come to a stop. What happens is it slows down over time. It reaches the peak of its jump, of its throw. When it hits the top of its throw, that's when its speed is 0, and then it starts accelerating back towards the earth. So this player speed, we want this to increase over time. Okay, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to set a max speed value, and we're going to have our max speed value set to -10. And what we're going to do is every frame we're going to say if our player speed is greater than the max speed. Now I know this is a negative number, so maybe we'd actually want to call it like minimum speed, but it's the max speed in the negative direction. So maximum speed towards the bottom of the screen. So the max speed is 10 towards the bottom of the screen, which is why we've got the minus. So we're going to say if our player speed is above the max speed, then we're going to change our player speed by taking 1 from it. And what you should see now is when we run this, in fact, if we, so before we had our bird was stationary, and then we had it falling at a constant speed. Now it should speed up. And actually that was a little bit too fast to see. So let's try with something like that. Can you see that it speeds up over time? So it starts at a speed of 0 and it speeds up over time. And now what we can do is if we give it a initial upward velocity, you'll see that it slowly slows down and then comes back down. So let's try and maybe a 0.2 here. And that felt quite good. So what we're going to want to do now is we want to make it so that the player can jump. So we're going to say, we're going to check for a key press. So we're going to say if the space key is pressed, then we're going to make the player jump. The way we're going to make the player jump is we're going to set the player speed to 10. And we're going to default it back to 0. Now what you should see is, oh, game object has no attribute is pressed. That's because this doesn't want an underscore. So game.is pressed. So space key is also not defined. Is this a lowercase s? It is. So now you can see that our player is able to jump. And actually I'm not really a fan of these values. I feel like they're a little bit, the jump's a little bit slow. I want it to be a little bit of a faster jump. So we're going to increase gravity. We're going to reduce our terminal velocity. We're going to set this to 6 and 6. And what we can do is we can just play with these values until it feels kind of nice. And what I'm going to do is maybe let's make that 0.3 maybe. Let's try that. And what we're going to do is we're going to increase our maximum negative speed back up to minus 10. Now one issue that we have is, can you see there, if I hold the space key, every frame the space key is pressed, I set the player speed to 6. So what we might want to do here is we might want to add an AND. We're going to say if player speed is less than 0. So we only want the player to be able to jump if they're not already moving up. And actually let's make that is less than minus 2. So we want to make sure that the player can not just hold the space key. Okay, so that feels okay for now. So what we're going to do is we're going to stick with that. So let's just go over what we've done. We've started by creating a player, and then we've set up 2 variables, our player speed and our max speed. Our max speed is actually a negative because it doesn't describe the maximum speed towards the top of the screen, but the bottom of the screen. So we're talking about the negative y-axis. So we're talking about the maximum speed in the negative direction. Every time that the game loop runs, we move our player by its speed. And before we do that, we're going to check if we need to speed up due to gravity, aka if we've not hit terminal velocity, maximum speed. And then we've added a way for the player to jump. So whenever we press the space key and the player's already moving in the negative direction, we set our player's speed to have a positive direction. And if we just think about what the player's speed is going to be, so every frame, in fact what I'm going to do, I should really connect my iPad for this, but let's just do it with numbers for now. So our player speed is going to start at 6, then it's going to go next frame, it'll be 5.7, 5.4, 5.1, you know, so on. And what this means is you can see that in our first frame the player moves a step of 6, next it moves a step of 5.7, then 5.4, so it's getting slower. Every frame it moves by less until such a point that it hits 0. So for all of these frames here, when we've got a positive player speed, the player is moving up. At this point, the player is stationary. They don't move. That's the top of the jump. And then we're going to start decreasing, minus 0.3, minus 0.6, until we reach minus 10. So here we can see it's accelerating, accelerating. It's going to keep accelerating until we hit a speed of minus 10, at which point we'll start falling at terminal velocity, at our maximum negative speed. Okay, I hope you followed along there. That was a really quick introduction to how we'd do something like gravity in a game. Essentially, this is gravity, the acceleration, and this is our terminal velocity. Okay, this is our current velocity. So we now have a way for our player to jump. And now what we're going to do is we're going to want to create some walls. So we're going to create a top wall, and this is going to be a rectangle. We're going to want to create it to the right hand side of the screen, so let's say 300. We're going to give it quite a tall height, let's say 500. Would that be a good option? Yep, 500. We're going to get a width of 20. In fact, no, we want this to, let's just start it at 0 for now. We want our height to be 500, and we're going to make it green. So this is going to be our pipe. So rather than top wall, we're going to call it top pipe, and we're going to add it to the game. Like that. So we now have a pipe. Now we want this to actually generate above here so that we can create a gap. And actually, why don't we make it even taller? Let's make it 800 so it would fill up the entire screen if we needed it to. Okay. Now what we're going to want to do is we're actually going to want to generate a random position for this, so that every time the player goes through a pipe, they essentially get to, every time the player goes through a pipe, it will generate a new pipe and it'll have a random position. So I'm going to say from random, import randint. Now this is a function which allows me to generate a random number between two numbers, and we're going to use this to generate our y position. So let's say that we want a gap of 100 between our two pipes, our top pipe and our bottom pipe. Notice I'm just starting with the top pipe for now. I'm not doing anything with the bottom pipe. So for our top pipe, we want to generate a random location. So we want, let's say that we want our gap to appear anywhere between minus 250 and 250. So at minus 250, if we add 800 to that, we get 550, and our top value 250 plus 800 will be 1050. So we want to generate somewhere between 550 and 1050. So we're going to say random int between 550 and 1050. And that's going to be our y position. And you can see it's generated one there, and that's a little bit off the top of the screen, and 400. Okay, so if we want the top of the screen to be 300, and we don't want it to be more than 200 above that, so 200. So I'm just doing some calculations in my head. I should really have a way of drawing these down so that I can show you them as I go. So if 200 is the top of the screen, we want to be 4, so we want 600 to be our maximum value, and our minimum value would be if we want a maximum, so it would be 600, so we want it somewhere between 0 and 600, right? No, we want it between 200 and 600. There we go. Let's try that again. Anyway, we can play with that in a minute. So now we can generate our pipe in a random y position. We're going to do the same thing with our bottom pipe. Okay? But instead of us taking this random position, we're going to take top pipe dot y, and since we want a 100 gap and it's 800 tall, it'd be 400, so we want it minus 900, and this should leave a 100 gap between the two of them. And we can make that gap bigger or smaller as we see fit. So maybe we make that actually 950, and that'll give us a 150 gap. Okay? So now we have a way to create our pipes. Now what we want to do is we want to move our pipes every frame. So every frame we're going to say top pipe dot x minus equals 2, and bottom pipe dot x minus equals 2, and we're going to take 2 from the x position of both the pipes every frame, and that should move them. And there we go. We've now got our game mechanics, but unfortunately our pipes don't regenerate. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to check their x position. We're going to say if top pipe dot x is less than, let's say minus 400. So if it's gone off the left hand side of the screen, minus 400, then we want to generate a brand new position for it. So we're going to say top pipe dot x equals 400 and top pipe dot y equals 400, and then we're going to want to generate a random position for the this needs to be bottom pipe, sorry. So we're going to move both of our pipes back to 400, so we're going to take them off the right hand side of the screen, and then we're going to generate a new position for the y of our top pipe, and then we're going to set our bottom pipe to the same position, to a position below it again. So I'm going to say bottom pipe dot y equals top pipe dot y minus 950. So if our pipe goes off the left hand side of the screen, move both our pipes to the right hand side of the screen, generate a new random vertical position for our top pipe, and then put the bottom pipe underneath it. And if we run this, I'm hoping that every time it goes off the left hand side of the screen we get a new position, and I think that actually, you know, we can increase this value. So why don't we use 450 here as the x position. And there we go. You can see that we've got no collision detection yet. So what we're going to want to do is next we're going to want to add some collision detection. So we're going to say if player.collide with top pipe or player.collide with bottom pipe, then we're going to want to reset the game. And we can do that by generating a new position like this. So we're going to generate a new position for the pipes, and then we're also going to want to set the x and y position of the y position of the player again to its starting value, which was 0, like that. And we are also going to want to reset the player speed. So let's say player speed equals 0. And now we should have, if we crash, see it regenerates and restarts. Now we're also going to add in a score. So up here in our setup code, we're going to set our initial score to a value of 0. Every time a pipe goes off the screen, that's when we've got a point. So we're going to say score, add 1 to the score, and then we're going to want to write our score out as well. So we're going to say I'm not having a very good time with my indents here. So we're going to say game.write, and we're going to choose an XY. We're going to do minus 300, 300. We're going to say the text is going to be a formatted string called score, and we're going to input the score. We're going to set the color to black. We're going to set the size to 20. If we run that, we now have a score. And I'm not very good at this apparently. So there we go. Score of 1. Score of 2. So you can see that the score gets added when it goes off the left hand side. And there we go. I hope you've enjoyed today's tutorial. Sorry that it's a little bit longer, but this is a much more complex game idea than some of our previous more basic tutorials. So this is how we create a really simple Flappy Bird game. In fact, I'd say that this is probably the most simple Flappy Bird game that you can create. I hope you've enjoyed following along, and please keep on the lookout for any new tutorials coming up, and enjoy your games programming. Thank you.